Like the Joe Rogan. We'll start like the Joe Rogan show. I I just started watching Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan and they start talking about how Jamie bought the clubs for the OJ from OJ Simpson. So I thought, yeah, that's a way to start things. Just a little chitter chat.
Gosh, we didn't even get the headphones intro, just
No.
straight in, straight in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I keep the headphones on. That oh, I gotta sneeze. It's gonna come in. All right. Sacramento allergies. You can't you don't have allergies when you move here. You'll have them when they put you in the ground, I'll tell you.
No way, man.
Sit in bad air in this city. Where do you live?
I live at the very bottom of Florida,
Really?
the other
Oh,
allergy capital. Yep.
yeah. Have you lived through a lot of hurricanes?
Yep. Yep. The ones that you've heard about in the news, they both touched ground over my county over
Wow.
the last few years. So
Good old Florida.
the price of paradise.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
All right. So where shall we begin? With the home you grew up in, or a little bit about yourself, or do you have an agenda for this conversation that I'm unaware of?
yeah, well,
You've been around long enough to know how this goes.
yeah. Well, I was scheming a bit with CW, who somehow has my phone number. And he he reminded me that he planned to have an agenda when chatting with you, and it infamously did not go as planned.
That's
He talked about
normal. That's
anything and
how it
everything,
goes.
and I had a something of a I just want to bring. I'm perfectly happy in confessing my sins and doing the sort of thing that Randos is so good at. I also want to give you good content.
Oh,
And I'm aware that like sometimes randos come here. I don't want to come here and die on the vine of like monologuing and I just don't I'm not interested. Like some people need to be heard, and maybe I think everyone needs to be heard. And I probably need to be heard in dialogue, you know what I mean?
yeah.
Or more indirect. I don't need to like have a platform and talk about I can talk about the home I grew up in. But you know what I mean? Like, so I've been thinking about how to support what you do.
Oh,
And
don't worry about me. I want to hear about the home you grew up in.
okay, fine. I grew up Unitarian, Unitarian Universalist.
Wow. See, this is where the stuff is. I had no clue you grew up UU.
Yeah, yeah. And then like the independent Southern Baptist sort of thing swept me up in around 2000. And and soon after that, the Restless and Reformed thing happened. And that was when I deconstructed about 20 years ago now, and then kind of reconstructed into everything that you love and hold dear with Dutch Reformed tradition and Tim Keller in particularly. Uh, I found that a very cogent and sympathetic balance of head and heart being
Oh.
applauded at a particular time in our culture when I suppose we were worried about new atheists, at least on the online circles. The culture was saying maybe we need to fully and officially uh, and intentionally leave Christianity behind, I guess.
I need way more background than you just gave me. So you grew up UU. Did you actually go to the UU church regularly? Because that's a vanishing breed.
Yeah, yeah, we did. And but I mean, as you know, I mean, that's really when I hear Blue Church, I think I key into my origins.
Yeah.
That's kind of it's kind of a baptized version of what the cultural hegemony is at the time, particularly
Yeah.
boomer oriented, boomer facing.
Were you in Florida or were you in Atlantic Northeast?
I was in Florida. I was
Oh,
in
wow.
Gainesville. My dad was pursuing a PhD at the time.
Did your parents grow up UU?
No, my dad grew up Presbyterian, and his when his older brothers got cage stage, he's the youngest of three. He rejected all of that and tried to find a spiritual path that was everything that his brothers hated. So he became Yu. And my mom was a son of a or daughter of a pastor, and but he was kind of more he was Baptist, but more you, I don't know what you call how to fit it in our map, our little quarter map, but there was like a kind of interesting eclectic thing happening in the 70s and 80s, I think, where people were they were mainline, but they were looking at horoscopes and they were trying to figure out how to it was like early relevancy kind of culture, and people were
Re-enchant the main line. Yeah.
yeah. So that's what he was. And I think she took that ball and ran with it a bit further as like a Christian hippie, so to speak, in a way.
Yeah.
And that,
Yeah.
so those things met really well in the UU, I think.
So did you go every week to the UU or only when your parents felt like it?
Strangely, I can't remember not spending Sunday in church. Uh,
Wow.
I really don't know why. I think my dad has a prolificity addiction, and he likes to be there with the nice suit and the shiny shoes, and the nice ring, and he could do the collection and that sort of thing. And my mom formed really strong friendships there. So,
Okay. What kind of a kid were you in high school?
oh my goodness.
Yeah, Phlebas was right.
Um, yeah, how would you approach
Well,
that?
okay. Did you play Dungeons and Dragons? Did you play sports? Did you have any friends? Did you date? I mean, those are the basic
Is
breakdowns of
that
Americans.
interesting, Paul? Is that interesting?
Oh, it is super interesting. It tells me a ton.
Uh, well, okay, so my dad was he was the third of three brothers, and all three of them were football team captains.
Oh.
Uh, and in a way, I th- I always think about the meme of like the 80s was the Dare smoking ad about the dad saying, "Where did you learn to smoke cigarettes?" I learned it from you, Dad. So in his denial of his family's tradition, even as he embraced it to some extent, his kind of rebellion as the youngest kid who would kind of move out from the small town south and pursue a PhD and climb the ladder and find a respectable religion that was blue church and all that sort of thing. I rebelled from that and decided to be an artist and not play any sports and uh, yeah, hang out on the outside tables with the kids playing hacky sack and wearing Misfits shirts and that sort of thing. That's kind of where I was in the weird. So I kind of self-adopted that approach to life,
Did you
which
have emo girlfriends or were you a nerd that
no, it was the emos. Yep, it was the.
See? It's all these tells. They tell a lot.
Dang it, Paul. You've been doing this a while, haven't
I was doing this long before YouTube, my friend. I
you?
I am very interested in people, and I'm working these archetypes to try to figure out just where you settle.
I'm going to keep a few barriers up so I can reflect them back to you. I don't know if you
Okay,
go
all
reverse
right.
a couple of these.
So, where did you go to college?
I went to I went to art school,
Okay.
and I progressively I transferred three times, each time moving a state farther away from my parents, which was eventually got me. It took me from South Carolina to, which is where they are, to Georgia, and then down to Florida. And that's where I've stayed ever since.
Because in Florida, the further south you go, the further north you go, in a way,
Yeah, and then you go so far south, you're just in the Everglades, and I
right?
don't even know, it's just frontier liminal land. Like you're
And
just
and
living in
and
a
pretty quickly you're in
blue
Caribbean land
zone.
because,
Yeah.
That's because Miami is in many ways the capital of the Caribbean. People don't recognize that, but if you live in a place like the Dominican Republic, Miami's the capital of the Caribbean.
Oh, I can only
Um,
imagine. Yeah.
yeah, it really is.
Mhm.
So, what was art school like for you?
I think art school was the space where things were so weird and so wild and so on the edge that and that was so the normativity of what you're supposed to do in art school is to like everybody has to figure out how to be different from their past selves and from each other. And that is so band-aided that that actually gave me space to heal somewhat and to say, well, maybe I can't just be mad at my dad because he was mad at his brothers. Like maybe that's not enough. Like maybe I could just be different by being less emo. And even if it takes away, I could just kind of, as most people do in their early 20s, you say like, am I a rebel without a cause, or am I a rebel with one? And as I said, like like the early internet 2.0 was sort of
Yeah.
having its day, and people were saying it's not about you. You are not David. If you want to find yourself in the David and Goliath story, you're the cowering Israelites. Jesus is David. Those kind of radical, really almost like it felt like transgressive, uh, the aggressive means by which particularly reformed traditions started to tackle that media rich like early 2000s internet landscape,
Mhm.
and everyone
Mhm.
started to tune in and say, is there an answer? Are we just going to be meta-jellical and we just going to say we like Christianity because it's the backbone of the classical liberalism? So we're just going to nod to that formally, outwardly in the public sphere, but we're not really going to believe it? Or is there a reason for what we believe? And it was interesting that need, speaking of David and Goliath, the challenge, like the community always finds the champion. The champion kind of manifests out of what the community needs at the time. And 20 years ago, it seems like the reformed, this is me Uno reversing a little bit. Particularly the Dutch reformed, though I don't think they were celebrated as much. Uh, but the groundwork, the fertile investment over 100 years, the Dutch reforms. Uh, I suppose it's called Neo-Calvinism. That's kind of new to me. But
Yeah,
the stuff
yeah,
that you guys did
yeah.
for a century, you know, actually helped people to approach this with right-minded heads and hearts, like
Yeah.
I talked about, and which I
It,
stumbled into and was so grateful for. I really haven't looked back, uh, except that I found TLC and I realized uh, it seems like this is something I really appreciate about you, Paul, is because you're open-minded enough to notice this and try to be interested in it without being threatened by it. But the there's a new champion maybe that's being called for, it seems, potentially, because there's a new threat. There's a different Goliath on the scene, maybe, that the church is wrestling with. And to some extent, the Reformed tradition is now playing the role of like a Saul, like an old regime or a
mm,
villain almost. I don't
mm.
know. At least the
Oh,
TLC
that's
space
interesting.
sometimes. It's like you could be Catholic, you could be Baptist, but please don't be Calvinist. And I'm really interested in what that means. You know, and I know you're an artistic thing.
Yeah, oh, that is such an interesting frame. I mean, part of it is I grew up in, boy, you're going to derail your rando on me.
In a reverse.
You're reversing it. Because, so the Neo-Calvinism was supposed to be the hope of the world, and Calvin College was supposed to be the place out of which the Neo-Calvinist gospel would spread throughout the rest of the world. And
And it has been.
it
And
has been, but where is that now? I mean, because what part of what happened was the Neo-Calvinism increasingly started to look UU. And um and are they? Aren't they? I mean, where's Nick Waltersdorf at? And Neo-Calvinism, just like just about every other Protestant denomination, had to confront the the gender liberation movements. And so right now, um, Kristen Kobes Dumay on her Substack, one of the last things I saw her write was, maybe we should do the real gospel coalition. And it's like, and right now in the Christian Reformed Church, of course, her church is leaving the denomination. She goes to Church of the Servant, which was started by these the Neo-Calvinist restless and reformed in the 70s who started their church in the Christian school gym. And for years they wouldn't build a facility because that wasn't so you had counterculture vibes in there, and you had your Neo-Calvinism fetish in there. And, a couple decades ago, they decided to finally build a building which was basically on the campus of Calvin without being on the campus of Calvin. And all of the professors went there. And, it's a great church, and many of my friends go there. But there's, when it came time to sort of decide, they weren't a church that had to leave, in that they didn't put up an affirmation statement, and they couldn't, partly because they had a ministry to African immigrants. And so when this thing was picking up steam in the CRC, some of the people on one side were ready to get on with more of we need to line up with All One Body and some of these other groups and really fight Abide. And these African immigrants in their church were like, what? And then they began to realize, oh, you mean these African immigrants aren't on board with this aspect of the liberation? And the Africans are like, no. And
familiar
so
retreat, right? The
what
Methodist Church, the Catholic Church. Yeah.
so, and so from the inside, there are deep questions in the Neo-Calvinist ranks about, we like our answers, we like who we are, but are our answers really showing up now to address what's happening? And you better believe Phlebas's brother is going to watch this and show up on Voices and have thoughts. Um, because in the Christian Reformed Church, this is family stuff. And you just talked to Phlebas about all of his relatives in the denomination, because almost all of us have people on both sides. So, boy,
It
you did
is it
master class in derailing the Randos conversation
no that
by
that's
sidetracking me.
like so I fell into Presbyterianism partly because of my family, and partly, as most people do, you dabble. If you're restless and reformed, you go Reformed Baptist, and then after 5 or 7 years, you slowly realize what babies are for in the church. So I went Presbyterian.
I don't want to baptize them.
Yeah. But and then later I found out more about the heritage of what the Presbyterian Church in America went through. And
Yeah.
my vague sense, I'm really catching up on this, is that they did have an identity. They had a family uh debate about a century, over the late 1800s to early 20th century where they decided, are we Scottish or are we confessionally reformed? Like, which path are we going to take?
Yeah.
And they took the latter, and then they split, and then they split, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
But is that fair to say? Is that, or did the Presbyterian Church go through something similar that you guys are going
I
through?
don't know. I don't know the history of the Presbyterians well enough. They're cousins, and we've been so focused on ourselves and been doing plenty of splitting ourselves that we didn't have to worry. So part of what happens with Old Princeton
Mhm.
is that when Westminster East gets founded, you've got some CRC types who join in on them.
Oh,
And
really?
so, yeah, so Roger Greenway was a colleague. Roger Greenway eventually was a CRC minister, son of a CRC minister. His son Scott pastors in West Michigan. His son Scott went through college and seminary with me. Friend of
That's
mine.
Westminster is the shining light, like
Yeah. So Westminster East, because Westminster East and Westminster West are
that's
two different things.
you're right.
And they approach things in different ways. And Tim Keller is sort of the shining star of Westminster East because when I was growing up, there was some collaboration between the Westminster East Presbyterians and some of what my father was in. There was the Gospel to the City movement in the early 80s that Westminster East was really pioneering. And so my church was adjacent to my father's church was adjacent to some of that. When, Harvey Kahn, interesting cats. Um,
Okay, so
so
this means we're doing that in the 70s and 80s too. That's good to hear.
yeah. So they were wrestling with, they were very much wrestling with the legacy of racism, which of course for the Dutch CRC, that's a very different thing than for Southern Presbyterians,
Yeah.
who had been in the South in the antebellum period and had to go
Well,
through
and
that.
defended it, defended
Yeah,
slavery and owed slaves.
yes.
You
The
guys
Dutch
don't have to.
Calvinists, of course, or the Dutch Calvinists of my tribe start beginning to come over in the latter half of the 19th century after the Civil War. And so they, in a sense, come in innocent of this stuff because they were scratching, they were farmers, they were dairymen and farmers from the Netherlands who were coming to America with the dream of owning a dairy themselves.
Uh-huh.
And then they established their Christian Reformed churches with high, thick walls and Christian schools and Christian institutions to keep their people together. And
Yeah.
of course, the First World War sort of breaks that open because they're all in their church worshiping in Dutch, and the Americans, who there's a real anti-German streak going on, and you see these people that are tall with blue eyes and blonde hair meeting in these buildings, and they're speaking a foreign language, and church gets burned down in Iowa. Suddenly, Christian Reformed churches are festooned with flags saying, "We're not Germans, we swear, we're Dutch." And so all the Dutchmen have to start learning English.
Yeah.
And
That
from
goes
there,
back to even the Revolutionary War, right? There was an equivocation between the Dutch and the Germans, I
I'm sure
think.
there was. There always is because, there's how many Germans and how many Dutch, and to everybody else, that kind of sounds German. They must be German.
Yeah.
And even Pennsylvania Dutch are not Dutch, they're German.
Great
So,
point.
Deutsch, I mean, it's a
Uh-huh.
confusion that Dutchmen are terrified over at certain points in time. So,
Yeah.
anyway, boy, you have
Well, that's
totally you
something.
have totally derailed this conversation.
I'll help. I'll help. I'll show how I really think this is fruitful and it's good content. Um, I think the
I am
reform.
not a content creator. I don't
No, I
care
know
what YouTube says.
TLC is anti-content. I understand,
Okay.
but but we. I think that folks from a reformed heritage, and I've come to be convinced that it's particularly a Dutch reformed heritage, are so well positioned to document, to write the transcript of what decline looks like and transformation in the West and Western Anglosphere churches. And you've been able, like, as soon as that podcast about Restless and Reform came out. You took it and ran with it a few months ago, and you just like, oh, I know exactly how to map the last 50 years, and if asked, I could do it over the last century. And I don't think that there's other traditions who uh, have a history of writing and that
Hmm.
like noticing and being able to see the synthetic picture.
Hmm.
And I think it's really fun that there's a Christian Reformed pastor who's like a an axle in the wheel around which there's all these interesting spokes. Many of them, they don't know what they are, but they're not Calvinists, whatever they're going to be. And you're helping to document and to sketch out how we got here,
Hmm.
and maybe that's our role, which is interesting.
Hmm.
If I could use uh if I could use a pronoun like our, it owed us together. Maybe that's something like what you, me, and Phlebas and other folks can say. That's what we're here for, I guess, is to understand like what the failure was,
Hmm.
and that's something I want to. I don't know. I'll give you some space to play with that. And then I got something else to build on with that if you want to build on it.
Boy, that's a super interesting thing because it was so interesting when Aaron Wren contacted me when Synod 2024 did what, or 2023 did what, did I remember which Synod, because he's like, I thought the CRC was mainline. And it's like, not really, but sorta.
Yeah,
And the
give us a
CRC,
couple years. We're figuring that out right now. Yeah.
yeah, the CRC has been in this strange position of not really participating in everything that sort of Protestantism in America is going through, but
Yeah.
not being apart from it. And I think you're really right that it's been watching very carefully. And I think part of the reason the Dutchness has helped it with that is if you're a little country with big aspirations and a
Yeah.
history of success, but you're between the English and the French and the Germans and the North Sea, you learn to pay attention because if, anything that comes at you from any direction will probably kill you. So learn to be a little nimble on your feet, whether it's flood or Nazis or French Revolution or the English looking over and saying, oh, capitalism, stock market, East India Company. We'll take that. And that's the Netherlands. I mean, that's their history. And so maybe that has sort of bred into us a propensity for paying attention. And,
Well,
when I,
that's the Dutch side. But
yeah,
do you think your Reformed side helps you to?
well, the Reformed, so, okay. Boy.
I know you could. I know.
So think about Calvin. And I know all kinds of people are like, double predestination or yada yada. This is the sleight of hand where everybody looks at double predestination and the Calvinists are working over here. Yeah, yeah, keep telling us that, keep making us a straw man. Keep doing that. We'll keep doing our work over here while you pay attention to that. Um, because what Calvin does is watch what's happening in the Reformation after they've had some time to see what's going on. And Calvin, of course, is a French refugee. He's in a city that's basically been taken over by French refugees. But Switzerland is all these little, these little burgs and cantons and things that are all experimenting with stuff. And what Calvin winds up doing is writing these institutes, which it's like, well, what are they? It's not a catechism. It's almost a vlog. It really is. It just grows and grows and grows over the years, where
Yeah, the blog
Calvin's,
of this is what, like, we're actually Catholic, and we want to explain what that means.
that's right.
Willing to read.
And
Yeah.
and even the Belgic Confession, which is like, they're gonna kill us. Please don't kill us. We're really Christians. Here, look.
Uh-huh.
And the Heidelberg Catechism, which is this reformed document in the middle of Germany, before it's Germany, which is this hotbed. So it's write something that the Catholics can recognize. They're not going to go there with you, but that the Lutherans can recognize. They're not going to go there with you. And so what the Reformed faith winds up being is, I think, in some ways, proto-evangelical,
Yeah.
because you're going to take a lot of what you have from the Protestant Reformation and synthesize it. And so that's, of course, what sort of happens in England. It's got its extremes within it, but it's also got some flexibility. And the Dutch, are, if anything, flexible and pragmatic while not losing certain aspects of dogmatism. And I think that's why the Dutch Reformed have a rather peculiar, it's hard to sort of put into language, have a rather peculiar way of navigating these things. And, and so that then gets embodied in the CRC in a deep way through, I think part of what made the mid 20th century so important for the CRC was it comes into this great mixing period of the Second World War with a degree of sort of some fundamentalist instincts. We're going to be rigidly Sabbatarian.
Yeah.
Um, we're not necessarily going to be young earth creationists, but we'll tolerate them in our midst, and we'll probably tolerate others that aren't there with us. And so we're going to try and navigate all of these tensions without, sort of train wrecking like a lot of others. And
Mhm.
so when you look like at
Because you're
Walter,
confessional and you're
yes,
magisterial, you know how to you know where the hard spots have to be and where the spots can be.
right.
The
And that's
in that
really
state,
difficult as
yeah,
as fights rumble through time.
wars over it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I love my tradition and I'm proud of it. But I
Mhm.
also know, I mean, when I first started this thing and people start coming to me and they're like, where should I go to church? I'd be like, I'd go through the yearbook and I'd find, oh, there's a CRC over here. And then people would go there and they'd be like, I didn't quite know what was going on there. And I thought, yeah, I guess that's probably true. So just go out and see what you can find, because I knew that all of these Christian Reformed church are going to have their own things, and I can navigate in them quite easily,
Sure.
because I know the tradition. But for someone coming in who doesn't know the tradition, I trust that there are good people there, but whether it'll be intelligible, I don't know. So I think you're right in that the Dutch have kind of been watchers, and then we write and we talk and we share, um, and we hope to just be helpful in some ways.
That is so fascinating. I didn't see that coming. And I mean, that's just a dark area in my map is understanding that particularly Dutch heritage. Phoebus is gonna love this.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
coming.
Phlebas set this whole thing up. This is Phlebas. This is
Just a
be
light.
Phlebas is going to sit back there. I mastermind this
Yeah.
conversation.
Because I only have the reformed side of that to engage with, and other than like I've got like Do Your Vered on my and people help me navigate what's it like to be an artist for God's glory. You guys did good work with that, 50 years ago, and uh, but the reformed traditions really helped me. Uh, it's helped me to know where the hard places are and where the soft spots need to remain. Because like early on, I had a reformed really mentor, father figure in a real sense who let me know that if your anchor is embedded in the rock of Christ, you can sail anywhere.
Yeah,
I've said it
yeah,
before. I think on streams, you may have heard it, and that's not liberalism or conservatism. That's a whole different thing. That's really
yeah,
understanding what rocks are for, where
yeah,
the real rock is, and
yeah.
understanding that the freedom that you have in light of that allows you to, celebrate people finding Christ in the Roman Catholic Church,
Yeah, yeah,
as it seems like people are going ortho,
yeah.
which is interesting.
Well,
And
and I think Keller really nailed that. I know Keller gets a bad name as being a squish or something, but Keller, he wasn't, you call him a squish, he's not going to fall over. Um, Keller really nailed that well. And Keller, so I had one opportunity to hang with Tim Keller a little bit in 2006.
yeah, yeah.
And we had our Sacramento cluster. We were planting our churches in the aughts. And one of our people had a connection to Redeemer, and they were doing this sort of little not publicized conference that would do very small. And so we got an invite and we went. The four of us, Ron Vanderwell, who's been on the channel recently, he went. I went. Kevin Adams,
Oh,
he's been on the channel, and Tim Blackman, who I really got to get on the channel. So the four of us went to New York in 2006
wow.
and got to spend some time with Tim and with his church staff. And really, I only had one like tiny little chance to have a conversation with Tim a little bit, and I started bringing up some of the Heidelberg Catechism stuff, and he was just basically like, "You guys have had this stuff the whole time. You just haven't done anything with it." And he was right. I mean, that he was right. And so he really decided he was going to run with this. And now it's helpful to remember that, and he's very honest with it, that before 9/11, his was just another struggling little conservative Presbyterian church in New York City. And he did a number of things right. He integrated a bunch of things from the seeker movement. He was a very adaptive, flexible guy. And then when 9/11 happens, suddenly, because of what's happening in New York on the ground, gets this rush of people. And they were a very credible church, and he was a very credible preacher. And he was an amazing preacher, a very evangelistic preacher. But he was very open with us about, yeah, if you then I started studying him carefully a little while after that, and I began to notice, oh yeah, he's not just reading from the New York Times. He's not just reading from Mark Lilla. He's not just reading the Atlantic. He's not just reading the Blue Church so that he can talk to these people in New York City. He's also been reading Kuyper and Bavinck and the Neo-Calvinists and saying, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. And he did it. And it's a really amazing thing.
So something I've been wondering a lot about is so Jordan Hall, your conversation with him, I'm going to make sure that this Rando's conversation is relatively evergreen. But he's brought up many times, I think, this idea of shaman culture,
Yeah.
versus these various ways we try to get at like royal kingly culture. I think that was his appositional framework. And TLC is good at shaman culture. Tim Keller was good at it in a way. It's being able to sit and submit inside of a liminal changing space where there's not firm boundaries, and to be very comfortable with that and invite other people to be comfortable with that, but not just to sit there, but to point to meaningfully point at where things are going so that we know where the new king's coming from, in a sense. I think that's one role that the shaman provides, like it's like an Elijah or the John the Baptist character, where you have to be able to say, he must decrease so that I will, sorry, I will decrease and he will increase, right? Like you've got to be able to play in that space so that a new norm can kind of manifest. And I
Yeah.
think I think that's what Tim Keller was helping to do, was to say the sit there's a lot of God loves people. There's a lot of people in cities.
Yeah.
Like, just face it. So God loves cities.
Yeah.
It wasn't a left-right thing in the 2000s, I think. At least it wasn't framed as like pandering to the liberal gaze, making like that wasn't really how it was thought of. It was just like, how can I reach people where they are most frequently gathered. It's almost like is like a fun like economy situation where he's like, if I'm in the city, I'm reaching the most people with the least amount of work. There's really kind of a beautiful math he was playing with there. But that was like a shamanistic kind of move to make, I think. In TLC, the thing I love was one of the main things I love about TLC is it's really good at early identifying where the cosmic space is kind of moving. And I wonder, is TLC, is the role that we're meant to play to point to the coming king, whatever the
Mm,
new hegemonic culture is to be, and to help people find their role in that? Or is our space, which is valid, or another valid approach to shaman culture, I think, is to stay to just live out our lives uh in a sense, as in that liminal space, it always got to help people in a 4 year move into where the different homes in other places that they're supposed to be. I guess like estuary is a way of that being an ecological term, is a way of identifying that this is one of many ecosystems. You can't live your whole life in an estuary, but it plays a critical role at a particular stage of development. So some folks got to stay in estuary to help keep the door open so that people know what it's there for and how and make sure its ecological function is working. But I don't know. That's just been something I've been thinking about. Is are we going to decrease and something else is going to increase? And are we going to be ready for that? Or is that even is that ever supposed to be? I don't know. I don't want to think about that before it's here.
yeah.
But I don't know. What do you think about that? I'm sorry. I'm starting a lot of sentences, not finishing them. I hope you're okay.
I'm absolutely fine with that. I think TLC is a space, Grizz, Grizz definitely a shaman in the TLC. It's the best way to think about him.
Shaman of shamans.
Um, and we're sort of a room of requirement for a lot of people because they need a room. And there's a lot here that they can sort of find, and they can find friends, they can find a meal, they can find a place to lay their head, they can find someone to talk to. Um, so it is in that way an estuary. It is a cove from the storm.
Yeah,
Um, I think you're right in that I think sort of like a shaman in this randomness. I mean, there's very much an element of randomness and shaman here in terms of the signals are so disrupted that you're going to be able to see changes in the patterns just because we're always doing weird things in front of ourselves. The owls are not what they seem. Um,
yeah,
so what has frustrated a lot of people right from the start is that they wanted the TLC to be more of a destination.
yeah,
And in terms of, and that I'm partially responsible for that because I, and I think this is a little different from Tim. I don't know, if Tim were around today, I don't know where Tim would land on this dynamic. We have to
really.
offer people some places now
Hmm.
because everybody needs places. But I don't know beyond the kingdom of God in sort of the full sense. Beyond that, I don't know what the next chapter of church will look like. And
Yep,
just participating with my conversation with Kale this morning, gaining
yep,
some insight about what's been happening in the Roman Catholic Church, watching the Orthodox moment right now in America as they're sort of finding their footing and gaining some traction, looking at the breakup of the post-war neo-evangelical consensus, which is quickly sort of coming apart in America, the continued collapse of the main line. Um, there's a lot of questions about Islam, but Islam has plenty of problems of their own that, and that I think a lot of people don't really want to own up to. So I think the role of TLC has sort of been a wayside chapel for many people. Because
Okay.
if you go down a road, you'll see this strange little wayside chapel. It's like, well, what is that? And what it is if you need a place to park and to rest, and maybe there's some chaplains in there. Just thinking about that this morning, Happy Luke is back from his Lenten fast.
Yeah.
Um, and noticing that in the tiny little chapels in the corner, you've got the House of Woo, and you've got Luke, and you've got Grail Country, and you've got Jacob's Corner, and you have all of these strange places, and people tend to gravitate. Some kind of fairly easily go between them, but some people aren't very terribly welcome in other spaces or don't feel welcome or are angry about it. But we are sort of a network of wayside chapels that can help people sort of come in, rest their feet, talk about maps, and maybe give people a little bit of advice. Okay, so that's kind of the direction you want to go. You should probably talk to this guy. Maybe they can help you find your way to whatever's next. And
Mm.
that rather than we're building a city as a destination.
Yeah.
Because again, I,
Shamans are really bad kings. They
what,
just
yeah, they're terrible kings. They're terrible kings. But they have an important role to play at different times and places
yeah.
to, to kind of help people disrupt it. Because shamans basically disrupt patterns. Because sometimes if a pattern gets too stuck in us, the pattern needs to be disrupted so other patterns can be pursued and moved into, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we're in a very liminal time and place in the broader culture and in churches all over the place. And I don't think anybody knows what exactly is coming. I think Jordan Hall is right that in times of dissolution, focus on, in baseball terms, focus on the fundamentals. Focus on loving your neighbor well. Focus on hospitality. Focus on, let's try and not bullshit ourselves too much about things. So that's hard for some people because we're coming in with our sacred cows and it's like, don't touch my sacred cow. It's like, all
And our
right, well,
profiles, our sacred profiles.
yes.
I'm
So
not,
you might, if you
how
don't
do you
want
do
that thing
that?
touched, you probably shouldn't come here. Stay over there at Christian YouTube or Muslim YouTube or Blue Church YouTube, whatever wherever they're reinforcing your little narrative because you need someone to keep telling you the right answer over and over again so you can still believe it despite all the dissonance you're feeling. That's probably not this space. This space. Go ahead.
Can I just double click something on that?
Sure.
Um, do you think is Jordan Hall identifying something? And I really think this is a perennial question, particularly with TLC. Is he identifying uh, an authenticity in uh, in culture that he wants to see more of that actually is uh, at odds with, in friction with the sort of pro-felicity movements that are bringing people into the church? Is he identifying a competing reason, or is he really kind of talking about um, just a different flavor of the same impetus? Because that is something I wonder about. And I've tried to be a very helpful troll in the chat often about this idea of like how how often are people are going to come to Jesus because they want free food and they're going to goad him into a miracle to fill their bellies before Jesus gets upset with them and
Yeah.
says, I'm not going to feed you again."
Yeah.
Yeah. And so many of our movements in culture, I think, right now, whether it's the prophylatic culture or potentially this like uh authenticity, inviting each other to birthday parties, cutting down a tree in someone's yard kind of culture that I very validly respect that Jordan Hall is very attracted to. How often does that, how often are we going to appeal merely to that, like good people culture? Like we want better neighbors, so we're going to be Christian. I'm not accusing Jordan Hall of doing that or orthos necessarily, but I'm aware of that being a tendency. Again, I think that's something that the Reformed tradition is maybe has a big immune response built up to worry about.
Yeah.
Like are you there for the smells and bells slash birthday parties
Yeah.
and neighbors cutting their lawn for you?
Yeah.
Or are you there for Christ himself?
Yeah.
That's something I wonder about. And
Yeah. Well, there's the Reformed tradition is definitely an iconoclastic tradition, and Calvin himself was very attuned. I mean, he was the one who says that the human heart is an idol factory. We are
those
so
are,
quick to make
yeah,
idols, and so you can idolatrize a lot. And an idol, it's important to remember that an idol is a good thing made ultimate. And so part of resisting idolatry is holding good things loosely. And when you have a time of collapse, which is what we're in right now, people really want to grab onto something good, and they should, and they have to.
they don't want
And
to
so
drown.
that's
They're
right.
okay.
And
That's
so
fair.
when they grab on something good, you could say, good. Yeah, I'm glad you grabbed onto that. You need that. Hold on to that.
Uh-huh.
But
Go
don't.
farther up and in.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's a it's like C.S. Lewis when he talks about settled happiness in this world. He says the Lord won't give us that because when we sort of settle for settled happiness, we no longer recognize that he continues to call us to the source of that happiness and the source of that goodness. And so these are way stations, and we need them. When your wayside chapel should have uh, some a crock pot with some warm soup in it, and a blanket, and a bathroom, and a soft place to. Here's a bed. Here's a cot. Spend the night here. Stay until you're ready to continue on your pilgrimage. That's what a hostel is. A hostel is a place where the pilgrims can stop and rest so that they can continue on in their pilgrimage. And
Boy, that cuts deep.
yeah. So and
That's fair.
but
Okay.
hostels need staffing. And so kind of what we've done in this corner is we are staffing this hostel of sorts for people. And they're coming in from lots of different directions and they're going different places. And that frustrates people because they're like, no, I really want everyone to be Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, on and on and on and on. And everybody who's staffing the hospital all has their own priorities too, but we understand the mission of the hostel that you're here, you're here for a cot, you're here for some soup, you're here for a blanket, and then when you're ready to do a little talking, well, we're going to talk to you too. And you're going to discover that that nice lady who's running the hostel, she might tell you to keep your dirty shoes outside. Come on, we're trying to keep this place clean. I mean, it's that kind of conviviality that grows. And Jordan Hall's I was reflecting a couple days ago. I have no idea how many videos Jordan Hall is not his channel because he's got a little channel but he didn't do anything with it. Not like he's doing. How many conversations are there of Jordan Hall on the internet in any given month right now? A lot. He's really making the rounds talking to people and he's very shamanic in that sometimes you listen to Jordan talk and it's like, what? Well,
Yeah,
but
it's
but
disorienting.
yes.
Absolutely.
So it's
Uh-huh.
very shamanic.
Yeah.
And but I think that's part of the role that he's playing. And again, early on there was a lot of desire. People wanted me to make this a destination and for me to, but what was so ironic was a lot of the people screaming loudest for me to make this a destination weren't going to fit in that destination at all.
I can think of a,
And
yeah.
yeah, I could think of a couple. Um, and so,
I was one of them in your comments
yeah, I
early,
know.
like when you were first blowing up. I was like, you know what, Paul? You could be the next, you could be the reformed Jonathan Pageau, but you just won't seize it. You won't seize the power for yourself. What's wrong with you? I didn't listen to you for like 2 years. This is like back in like 2017 or
I
something.
know. I remember. I
Then I
remember.
grew up a little
And
bit.
but that's part of hospitality.
Yeah.
Is that everybody's coming in with their own thing. And it's like you get to have your own thing. You know, you can have that. You can call me names, you can do stuff. I will draw limits sometimes. But you can
Yeah.
that's totally fine. Here's a cot, here's a bowl of soup, here's a blanket. If you need it, if you want it, it's here for you. And if you want to hang out a little bit and talk with some of the other travelers and compare notes, and that can be a lot of fun.
And I think that's what brought me back was real. I think culture had to um, deteriorate a bit more for a couple more years for me to realize what the value of the hostel a bit. And I was taking that for granted, I think, in in your early phase, I think it could be forgiven if you didn't realize just how fast the ground was moving, in 2016, 2017. And it took some people, it took some slower minded people like myself to catch up
Yeah.
and realize the need for that kind of hospitality online, I suppose. Which I suppose is what this is for. Yeah. And I think folks are grateful for it. I've been thinking about these conferences that we're doing, and maybe we're supposed to point a bit more towards those and through those towards more kind of grounded local community kind of investment, which I get the sense that the ground's moving in that direction too.
Yeah.
People don't want the conference to be the destination either.
Right.
Obviously you can't just live at a conference. So you're gonna start investing in the people to your left and right a bit more in your county. And maybe that's what the coming conferences are going to be able to more intentionally identify, for folks, or maybe it's just going to manifest. But I get the sense that that's where it's going to go. Otherwise, people are just going to be continue to be frustrated. And the good thing about TLC is I don't think it stays frustrated very long. I think it does know how to pivot and shift and find some sort of,
Stuff
you know,
emerges quickly. And again, I give credit to Jacob. I just doing it on Twitter this morning because I mean, Jacob comes to Sacramento and he says, I'm going to take you out to lunch. And so we go to Outback Steakhouse and he buys me a steak and, typical, very generous Jewish hospitality. And then he sits down and he's ready to tell me, okay, this is the plan. So, are we going to have one of those now? Yes, you don't have one, and you're too reluctant to have one, so I'll give it to you. So, okay, Jacob. And he's like, TBN. It's like Trinity Broadcast Network with Paul Crouch and the blue hair, and that's what we need to be. It's like, but Jacob at the same time, then he starts with the live streaming, and it's like, okay, oh, there's something, and that's sort of how we've been. And of course, Eamon and Catherine, they do the Thunder Bay conference, and then it's like somebody does something, and the rest of us are like, oh, and this is where so much of the Vervaeke stuff is so helpful because John helps us see a bunch of things. And one of the things that I've learned in this process, which I probably knew intuitively but couldn't articulate, is that again, a number of things like together we're smarter than we are apart. And just in my sermons over the last little while, when I was, really trying to think about what it was like to watch Jesus do what he was doing, at least, through the canonical gospels that we have. And then even Jacob admits that there's a faction in the culture. I think it's impossible to ignore that they're just longing for a reprieve from the Romans, and they want a leader to emerge that will do something similar to what the Maccabees had done with the Greeks. So
it had been done before.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So and get rid of the Romans and Jesus, of course, seems like a really promising candidate. because he certainly has popularity. He's certainly demonstrating power with miracles, and in that context, miraculous power is exactly what you're looking for in terms of validation from heaven, because heaven, of course, in that culture controls the sweat, how Earth is going.
Mhm.
And but then if you would ask yourself on Palm Sunday, okay, what exactly does this path look like? And get down into details. And of course, any plan, if you're going to plan on overthrowing the Romans, well, you're going to need some plans and you're going to need some swords and you're going to need some strategy. And of course, we all kind of know how that goes, but we also know that no plan ever actually goes how it's supposed to. And usually, when you have these big turnings in history, the ancients would look at that and say, well, that was surely the gods, because no human can actually plan all of the particulars to have a big change like that. And so, what that means is that you should always, it doesn't mean you're, and this is again something people confuse with Calvinism. Calvinists are passive and inactive. And it's like, really? I've seen Calvinists all my life, and they can be as activistic as anyone around.
Yeah,
And
let's
as
just look horizontally at the history of reform
That's
movements.
right. These
Where
people
do you
love
draw?
to act and do and decide. They really do. So they're
Mhm.
not just waiting for God to take the wheel. But at the same time, there's also an understanding that you can never know enough to do almost anything. And if your demand for knowledge is that you know everything, you're never going to have a baby. You're never going to get married. You're never going to take a job because you can't know enough. And so, actually, I just heard a little bit of Peterson when I was waiting for you. And Peterson made the point that, if you don't know what to do, sometimes it's good to not do anything, but usually wisdom requires helping you know that. Most of the time, it's better to have at least some little plan and try something, but then pay attention because, and Peterson has also been really good on this because your failures show you reality. They painfully reveal to you your wrong-headedness. And so almost any leader in history has failed enormously or has learned from other people's failures and has then acted. And so I think in terms of early on, people are like, a lot of people were waiting for me. We're going to start. There's Lutheranism and Calvinism. And although Luther would have hated the idea of Lutheranism, Calvin would have hated the idea of Calvinism. And I frankly hate the idea of Vanderclayism. I don't think there ever will be one. Let me be straight with that. Nor do I want one. But to the degree that what we're doing here helps in some tiny way, and what we are doing here is tiny. What Jordan Peterson has done is tiny. And Jordan Peterson is scales above what I've done. So, in some tiny little way, if we help people take tiny little basic steps towards more shalom, and of course, in my frame of reference, towards God in Christ, if we help the church learn tiny little things, I can rest in peace because that's if I manage to do that. And I'll have to say that I mean part of the reason why I don't give up on this crazy little enterprise that we're all sort of pitching in together for is I've had an opportunity to participate at a scale that Living Stones never could offer me. And it's helped Living Stones. You know, of the
Yeah, praise God.
of the five new members, three adult baptisms. None of those three men who in their 50s were baptized a few weeks ago would ever have been baptized if I hadn't done the Freddie and Paul show, if
Wow.
I hadn't made a video about Jordan Peterson. They wouldn't
Wow.
have been baptized here. I can't talk about God's economy, but
Mhm.
and just in terms of the church being able to pay my salary and keep lights on in the building, It's people on the internet that have sent completely unsolicited gifts to living stones that has kept this church with lights on and, a pastor employed by it.
Mhm.
So, again, people are like, we want a plan, we want a direction. And I'll be like, let's start with loving each other, being hospitable to each other, being honest with each other. How's that for a plan? That's a good plan. But
Do you see
no,
what do you see what we're discovering? Like Calvinists make good shamans. I really think so. Neo-Calvinists.
there's
It's
a
not an accident.
title.
It's me and Phlebas in the chat knowing and everybody else disagreeing with us that it's not despite your heritage, but you being dovetailed with your heritage. And of course also being dovetailed with it sounds like I mean the things you've said about your father and the impression he made on you formatively and your own personality and your own disposition, but dovetailed with your heritage has allowed you to be able to handle uh, not trying to crown yourself.
Yeah.
I think your heritage helped you to understand that you don't have to crown yourself. That doesn't need to be something that
It's
that
inappropriate. Jesus is the one who will give us our
yeah,
crowns. I cannot crown myself. Jesus is very clear. When you
yeah.
go in there, take the back seat, take the lowest chair. And if you're going to be exalted, you need to be exalted by someone else. It's not your job to exalt yourself. Jesus
Mhm.
is very clear. So, and no, you're right, because I had a very peculiar upbringing in the CRC. And the conversation I did with Ron Vanderwell. I mean, we've got a lot of commonalities,
That was really cool. Yeah.
but I am raised at this in this very estuary wayside chapel place in
Mhm.
Paterson, New Jersey, where my father is offering basic hospitality to African Americans who, for a variety of reasons, don't fit in the black church on offer in Paterson. And the Dutchman who came in there didn't fit in the broader Dutch CRCs in the neighborhood. And together they were misfits together and happy little group of misfits, always on the edge. I remember my father pondering if he should get a day job because, could the church continue to pay him poorly? you know, um, you know, and so that to me was just normal. And my grandfather did it.
Yeah.
He was the guy who in Owen Sound, Ontario, had to pick up basically the post World War II Dutch refugees from the train station because someone, rolled into Owen Sound speaking Dutch, and the train guys like called Domini Vanderclay because I can't understand him. I don't know what to do with him.
Speaking German.
Yeah, and so then Grandma says to Glenda, okay, get out of your bed. You're gonna sleep somewhere else. These people right off the train, they're gonna sleep in your bed, and we're gonna give them a meal. And then we're gonna ask around and figure out, did someone order some more Dutch immigrants to work on their dairy? And find out who they are. And so, yes, you would, and I would say providentially, me being a Calvinist, that this was God's plan for me. And I don't say that as some big, huge thing. I believe, again, I'm a Calvinist. God has a plan for all of us.
This means that you've got a map you can articulate. We from your heritage, you've got a map in order to navigate these things
Yeah.
that
And
you frankly don't have to be a Calvinist to adopt.
no,
We're like freely giving away this map is something that people can, you don't have to shadow the doors of our particular denominations to adopt it.
no, no. And
Mhm.
and and it's something that's deeply Christian, and many have done it. Um, and many are going to continue to do it. But we're just now in a space. I just had a conversation with someone, and this person, I've had so many of these conversations. This person, and there's been a trajectory in our time here too. People sort of at different times and places individually, but found themselves. They were raised in a particular faith, various idiosyncratic reasons. They had given it up, but something about it, then they have a child, they start a family. They need a church. But how? Is the Catholics or the Orthodox or the Anglicans or the church they grew up in, or how can I find a community to grow in faith within? And they wind up spending years listening to randos, while they're doing dishes or driving or working their blue collar job because, okay, so I'm not alone in this search and other people have found places. And so maybe there's hope for me. And again, and then as is usual at the end of our conversation, they're often unrecorded. They'll, say, thank you because I don't quite know what you've done for me, but now I got someone at my door. Hang on. Um, who knows what's lurking around here? All right. So what have we done? We've learned not nearly enough about you. That's what we've done. You've completely derailed. But
Like a
that's
good
okay.
troll, I think it's important to put over your opponent. And I'd rather you be the face of this conversation than myself. I want to you get to claim the crowd even though you weren't looking for it.
Well, tell me about being an illustrator.
Yeah,
Well, tell me about first. I want to know how you found the corner. Now, you already said you, like many people, that's actually very common. People find it and they get an idea that this is this thing. And then they realize it's not this thing. They're like, it's not this thing. I'm leaving. And then some of them come back are like, oh, well, maybe I can use that.
yeah, well, you're literally the only reform person engaging, I think, or at least you were around 2021 and thereabouts. So I came back because I was like, where else can I
Where
go?
else can I go?
But then I quickly realized, as culture deteriorated farther, it as the cultural discussion has deteriorated, and the particular crises of 2020 and 2021 had manifested. I and me realizing the need for um, that kind of um, that hospitality oriented community on the online space, and the way that kind of radically, like, people intentionally using the algorithm against its prescribed means, using it um, just for merely humane reasons despite itself is a really cool radical, it's a really revolutionary turn. It's not merely reactive, and so that got me back on board. I did the thing again. What most people do is you show up for your very first stream, and then Jacob reaches out, and then you go hang out with him, and then he offends you tremendously, and then you run away from him, and then you go find Grail Country, and then they find out you're a Calvinist. They paint a big red X on your back and say, "Stay away." Over here, we are universalists, which means you are not invited. But then and then at some point you have to get off you can't allow folks to do the merry-go-round, and you just have to say, I just really like you. And in response to you wanting to disagree with me about something, I'm not really here to agree or disagree with you. I'm actually here because I like you. And eventually that kind of warms a few hearts enough where you could kind of abide and find a space, which is what I did in Grail Country in particular. I like those guys a whole lot. And I don't even know, I'm not keeping track, but I don't know how much we agree or disagree about a lot of topics, but I can tell that God's doing a lot of wise, I don't know, he's just growing some really mature, thoughtful people in
Yeah,
that space.
yeah, yeah.
And I met them I think I decided to really commit with both feet here when I went to, we called it Symbolicon at the time. I tried to coin that term trollishly. Uh, Pajot's conference he did 2 Januaries ago, which is down in Florida. So I just kind of I was working on his comic at the time, and I was like, you don't have to pay me, just let me come in, just give me a ticket. And I want to meet some weirdos. Some weirdos. And they met a weird rando in me. So and I
You're
met Nate.
supposed to be Orthodox. You're not supposed to be Reformed. You're supposed to leave that. Don't you listen to Father Josiah Trenham? I mean, isn't he supposed to show you the way out of Presbyterianism?
Aren't you listening to Father Stephen DeYoung, Christian Reformed, multi-generational, goes to Westminster and then becomes Orthodox and only strawmans his Reformed tradition publicly before thousands. But by that point, I'm just like I'm just not I'm not I don't have that spirit of scarcity or defensiveness where I need to disagree or agree. I have 2 ears to listen and only one mouth to speak, so I'm going to be listening for where the spirit is, and then maybe sometimes speaking too.
Yeah.
So that brought me in, and I really feel that Pajot, the fact that the people that he has working on his particular projects, I feel like TLC might be. I I want to be careful of your time, but I think this dovetails into what we said before. There's a lot that Pajot it he doesn't articulate this desire to be like TLC or something, but
Right.
I think he's really doing what TLC, the best of what TLC is, and he's also accommodating a lot of the things that its critics bring up. Like he's putting stuff on people's bookshelves,
Yeah.
building culture. He's got a business to run, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
He has a crown that he didn't ask for,
Yeah.
but he is wearing it.
Yeah.
And and the people he has working on his books come from very eclectic backgrounds. They're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
necessarily Christian. They're certainly not Orthodox for the
Yeah.
most. And he's okay with he's another just like you. He's another axle in a wheel that looks the wheel. All the different little spokes want a certain thing, and they're all kind of asking like, "Won't you be more like me?" But the thing about the wheel that makes it the thing about the axle that makes it the axle is that it's actually very comfortable with these people coming from these different places and just being an activator for their different
Yeah.
backgrounds and interests. And
Yeah.
he's just enormously accommodating and interesting and aggressive with how he wants to challenge the topics of this age, I guess, to be a shaman in the best sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I don't know. I hope more TLC people buy his books, but maybe we're
You don't think
there's
there's
a
a lot
lot
of Peugeot books on
of us.
TLC shelves? I think there's a ton. TLC is not very big. That's something that people, I think, struggle to understand because they say, well, you got 30,000 subs on your channel. That doesn't mean anything. That those subscriber numbers mean very little on a YouTube channel. When I look at TLC, I look at how many people are showing up in live streams. How many people are watching the House of Woo? How many people are playing in Grim Grizz's little playground there?
Enough for
And
several conferences a year, apparently.
yeah, yeah. So okay, fair enough. There's a few thousand. There are a few thousand. But a few thousand in, when you're talking UK, Canada, Netherlands, Germany, um, Australia, New Zealand, that's most of where we draw people from. This is a niche. I took a little trip with my wife and I was wearing my Grim Grizz Spider Monkey hat and it was
Yeah.
sitting on the table and the waiter comes and he's like, "Is this like a Japanese?" You know, I
I didn't
said,
even know what it was when you put it on the other week.
"Yeah." And it's like, how can I explain this to him?
Uh-huh.
there's no way in the world I can. It's just a little bit of swag from a niche YouTube channel. That's all I said. Um,
And you know, maybe to give TLC an out, um, I guess you don't have to make books or even read books to be to be a tremendous force for good. There is that might be being too restrictive on what this shamanistic role is. But maybe there's something a little radical about just being humane online and that being the telos that actually and standing there and remaining there that's actually really kind of transformative and interesting. If you maybe you don't have to convert this into a press junket, you don't have to be as much as there was a time when I wanted you to write your book. And now I think maybe this media landscape, maybe you are writing the book and we're writing it with you just by making this media. It doesn't have to be the media behind your head. It could be the media, that we listen to as we're washing the dishes. And
yeah,
there's actually something really interesting about that.
yeah,
It frustrates people, frustrates me sometimes, and, as somebody who makes books, but it's uh not everyone has to have the same mode. And we know this intensely in this kind of cultural transition time where we actually we're begging for people who can find meaning in the squishiness, who
yeah,
actually aren't drowning,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah,
Nothing really good about keeping its head above the waves in the midst of chaotic waters.
yeah.
I think converting to a book sale, mission would probably be a violation of its first principles, I suppose.
Well, there can be room for books. I mean, we are culture making. We are definitely culture making. And part of it is, I struggle with this with my channel because I know size is a very strange thing in the internet and on YouTube. And I look at my analytics and I watch how these things go, and I often think, um, should I do what I'm doing? But I make videos because I make the videos I make because I can and because I want to. And I get to a point and it's like algorithm be damned. I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
I gotta I mean, I got going with this because I was watching the Jordan Peterson stuff and I was trying in the avenues I had to find conversation partners and not having a lot of success. And so I thought, well, I'll use the internet, just kind of the way Jordan is, and see what happens there. And I was completely unprepared for what that was going to do. But all along the way, I've learned things. And so I'm
Mhm.
happy the TLC has a culture. It's not a terribly easy culture to penetrate sometimes, but it has a culture, and I like the culture that it has developed. And when I look at like what Mark, because your story, similar to Mark Parker's story, when Mark Parker first got here, I mean, he was coming after me for all sorts of other different reasons, other different failings on my side. And so he would come and he would leave comments and then he would leave and then he would come. And at some point, the light came on. He thought, oh, wait a minute. Something else is happening here. I thought this was sort of straight YouTube, where this YouTuber is going to come here and tell me what to think. He's selling something, he's promoting something, he's trying to colonize me. He's trying to turn me into the PVK NPC. And it's like, no, I'm not. I'm just telling you what I think. I'd love to know what you think. And so then, and seeing what Mark Parker has done in the corner, I mean, and especially when he started, because yeah, there's a lot of conservatism here. And Mark isn't, doesn't fit into any of those molds really easily, but he stuck with it. And he found his niche with, Ron Copperman and the House of Woo. And it's like I look at that and yeah, they don't necessarily have a lot of players with them, but I regularly stop in at the House of Woo and I love what they're doing. And I love what Grim Grizz is doing. I can't always sit through all the branding that I've seen multiple times. I'm being brainwashed. Of all people, Grim Grizz, you're the chief brainwasher in the corner. But I, you know, and one of the things that I learned from my father is that people actually, most of the time, people change, and good growth is almost always slow growth. And I've seen that in so many people over the 5, 6, 7 years here, where, well, how do I measure good growth? I measure it in terms of character in dealing with, they're more patient, they're more generous, they're more stable, they're they can extend hospitality more easily. They've learned a few things. They know I've learned a tremendous amount in my time here. I know way more about the Roman Catholicism than I knew when I started. I know way no more about Orthodoxy. I know way more about all kinds of things. You know, the thing that Phlebas said about him being able to relate to his brother who's a Hare Krishna because of the time that he spent here. When I hear that, I'm just I'm like a Pentecostal who's twitching on the floor because I'm so happy. Because that is exactly what I want. I love Luke, you're getting me preaching, doggone it. Luke 15, you know, the father brings in the lost son, and the older brother's out in the field mad as hell. And I understand why the older brother's mad as hell. I get it. But you have to understand the father's heart. He said, "You're both my sons, and I love you both to death. And my son was lost and been found. And so I have to sacrifice the fatted calf. And I'm going to have this huge party. And you can just imagine that everybody who comes into that party, well, they want something. They're going to get a chance to eat some meat. That's awesome. It's going to be great food. That's awesome. But they hate that son of a bitch who came back, and they've got really questions about the father for letting him back in. And so when I listen to Rhett tell Alex O'Connor, I'm thinking about things, and coming out of sort of a Calvinist place, he's like, God's an asshole. So, right? You ever read the Psalms? God seems to have a lot of patience with his creatures that look up and swear at him. He has a lot less patience, and his heart breaks a lot more when we decide we're going to be God and go do something over there that's going to somehow save the world. And it's like, yeah,
So yeah, I think that's what you're good at identifying, and a lot of folks in this community are good at identifying is that turn from the tragic to the comic, where it looks like there's an opponent in the arena. They're your oppositional opponent, and what ends up happening is you realize that you were both wearing masks. You realize that they're wearing a mask, but you yourself were wearing a mask that identified each other as opponents. You take off the mask and you realize, it's like a Shakespearean melodrama, and you realize that you were the best friends that you didn't recognize the whole time, and now you can reconcile, and the
yeah,
whole thing turns into a comedy at the end.
yeah.
And I think we're really good at identifying. I think the Dutch Reformed tradition is good at that. I think there's a lot of traditions that are good at identifying uh, uh, what that looks like, what that particular, and being open to anticipating and being able to see and hear when that tragic turns into the comic, and when you realize that the opponent was actually someone who was playing a role, and that you yourself were playing a role that was creating that atmosphere, and all you have to do is both decide to take off the mask and then identify your true selves, and you realize that you're on the same side.
And it's fun to put on the mask sometime and fight some more. That could be fun. It's okay to do that.
That's a
We can
great
do that.
point, because now you know what the face is underneath.
Right.
Well, now you can perform. You're right.
Right. And when you put the mask on, this is what's been so fun about the whole kayfabe entry into the corner.
Uh-huh.
When you put the mask on, well, now you can, you know, Now you can jump off the top rope and body slam the dude, and you can really have a lot of fun with this. And I think the Dutch are able to do this. The Jews are often able to do this. And so, yeah, use the mask. Understand what the mask is for, but also understand that there is a face underneath the mask, and there is a soft, fleshy body holding up the mask, and
Mhm.
figure out how to play in the ring and what the ring is for. So, and yeah, so I've been,
Yeah.
super happy with the kayfabe aspect of this in terms of what it can teach us about how to play. And that's a hard thing to kind of teach some people sometimes because again, you've got internet literalism and you've got Christian YouTube, and so people come into this space just looking to, you know, do a
Yeah.
thing. And it's like, oh, go for it. You try and do that thing. Tell me how it goes. If you get it done and you're happy, I'll celebrate with you. That's fine. If you fail, which you probably will do, maybe I'll give you a cot. You can put your feet up. I'll give you a bowl of warm soup. How about that? Shall we do that? And people need that.
So what could you give us any spoilers for what Midwestuary, what we could be anticipating for that in light of
I have no idea. I'm not running it, which is the most beautiful thing about most of the stuff here. Now, in terms of what's going to be interesting is that so Jonathan and John have both grown far larger than we were at Thunder Bay or even Chino. And of course, Jordan Peterson have taken both of them up on a status rocket with him. And so, in a lot of ways, many of our conversations are no longer sort of little corner conversations. They're playing on larger stages. Um, and now we're going to have Rod Dreer in.
Yeah.
Dreer is such an interesting cat. And he's very different in person than he is on his blog. He channels all of his anxieties. He's sort of a prophet on his blog, deeply anxious, scary, fearful prophet on his blog. But in real life, he's much more balanced and personable and humble, which is good. And I think Elizabeth, I've never really met Elizabeth in person. So my expectations is that she's going to kind of be who she's portrayed herself to be. Kind of a Pentecostal who really wants people to love people. It was interesting when she said what she said about Louise Perry and Mary Harrington. She's like, these are like, women who are really comfortable with disagreement. And so they're really more comfortable in a manosphere than a lot of women are. And so Elizabeth is going to bring a very different vibe in there.
Yeah.
So, and she's also sort of more to the left on a whole bunch of things. So it's going to be super interesting what happens. And as I said to Sam, I said, you've got a lot of big, and to Chad, you've got a lot of big personalities and a lot of talkers on that stage. I don't know how you're going to organize this thing, but you should really think carefully about that because, you know, especially, John Vervaeke, he's a talker. I mean, you give him a mic, he'll talk. I'm a talker. I can talk. All of us can talk. So figuring out how to handle that much stage, I guess Kale's probably going to be tasked with a lot of figuring out how to manage that. So,
Oh. But it's not going to be Arc, which is
oh, it's not going to be Arc. No, no. And
yeah.
and they're going to try to, with an event that size, they're going to try to integrate as much estuary time in as they can. It's just logistically a difficult thing. I don't know, I didn't appreciate what Nate Heil could bring to the table until in terms of events until Northwestuary, and then I thought that was that's going to be a conference that's going to be difficult to top for a whole bunch of reasons because he had so many balances right there. And it was also the case that Rafe was coming in there off a very meaningful thing. And
Mm.
most of the guys that were on stage, it's difficulty when you bring Peugeot in, and it would be even more difficult with Jordan. But when you bring Peugeot in, he's got such a fanatical following and it's large enough that it can unbalance a conference. And Catherine noticed that right away in Thunder Bay.
Yeah.
And Vervaeke's audience has grown, but Vervaeke isn't quite as cuddly as Jonathan Peugeot. Jonathan Peugeot, you could make a little plush toy out of Jonathan Peugeot in some ways. He's such a sweet, nice, friendly, charismatic guy, and John Vervaeke's just less comfortable and more analytical, and so it's going to be a very interesting time. I think I would like to get I would like to figure out how to do regular conferences at Living Stones. I haven't figured that out yet.
Yeah.
And they would very much be estuary conferences. I know I have to bring in some stage people, so I'll have to figure out the economics, and that's where the economics get tricky because let's say I bring in Paul Kingsnorth. And I definitely want to give him an honorarium because this is what he's doing for a living and it's going to cost some money. And there's going to be travel expenses and there's going to be putting him up expenses. So I've got to raise that money. I've got to leave something for Living Stones because that's part of this, that Living Stones is going to need to make some money from this. And I don't want the speaker to unbalance the conference so that there can be stage time and estuary time, and it can go back and forth. And my goal is to have conferences generally between 60 and 100 people because that's what our facility could handle.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and already we've got sort of the southeastuary,
I was gonna say,
which is
yeah, that's more of a retreat, right? That's a whole different format that might be really amenable to this kind of.
yeah, I know like nothing about it, so I don't really know what's going on there.
Oh no, if you don't, I don't. I'm still trying to find someone who knows something about
Yeah. But then I also did the Connecticut retreat at my sister's place with a dozen people. I've done that twice now. And that was so powerful. It was so, I mean,
it.
because
Yeah.
it's intimate. It's like a church retreat in that we're sort of living together and we're sharing all our meals together and the room is closed. There are no cameras and people then can really say stuff that they can't say on the internet. And people will show up there that'll never show up on a live stream because for very good reasons, they don't want to have their face on the internet and their voice. So that was just a magical time and I want to keep doing that, and I've got to do all that while, I don't know what the Lord will do with Living Stones. I want to keep it going. I don't know what happens to Living Stones when I hit retirement age because my plan is not to just keep pastoring in my retirement. I think my wife, for very legitimate reasons, would say that's not, that's not fair to me, which would be right. So I've just got whole hosts of practical questions on that side. But that then leads into this other where we started this conversation about what happens, what are the new evolutions in church? So I'm a Protestant, and so hey, I don't have the problem with the Orthodox saying make the fifth century great again. You go for it. But I don't really buy that your Orthodox Church is just the fifth century falling from heaven and landing in this place here. You got plenty of the 20, especially when it's being fueled by YouTube.
Yeah.
So, and that's not a comment against you. Please synthesize the fifth and the 21st century. Go for it because Christianity today can learn from many centuries of Christian flourishing. Please send us your Orthodox wisdom. We need it. And the same for the Roman Catholics, and the same for the Anabaptists, and the same, all along the way. So I think we are going to continue to watch the Church of Jesus Christ evolve. And I'm okay with that. And will it be messy and will there be problems and will there be things that are not God glorifying along the way? Absolutely. There always have been. But we are God's spirit is not been taken from us. And God uses horrendous things to continue to, that's part of the point of the cross. There are plenty of eucatastrophes in the life of the church. And so I see estuary, what happens every Sunday morning in that little estuary group, it's usually 8 of us in that room. And there are 8 people that are there pretty much rain or shine. And then we have other people who will come in. And gosh, what God is doing in that little estuary group every week, it's like, I can't freaking believe how awesome it is. It is amazing. It is some of the most beautiful things I've ever seen happen in the church. And what's so beautiful about it is that it's like the young girl who's just drop dead gorgeous, but she doesn't know that about herself. That's the best part of her, you know? She's not a woman yet where who, has kind of has all the 360 knowledge. She's just young and beautiful and not self-conscious. And that's what that little estuary group is like. And so it never
Hmm.
stays that way. It can't. Nature's first green is gold or hardest hue to hold. But and I see estuary as kind of that thing that people are realizing, gosh, it's good to meet regularly. And this is something what I think Christian fellowship means.
Hmm.
And what's
Hmm.
amazing is that there's a couple of people in there that they wouldn't identify as Christians yet, and they shouldn't because they're not. But they're sure liking to play along with the rest of the Christians in terms of what we're doing, and
Hmm.
that's just beautiful. You, dang it! I'm such a freaking soft touch. I've talked way too much this
Put
conversation.
you over. Put you over. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I hope it was fun. And I look forward to seeing you at Midwestuary. I'm looking forward to that. I think there's probably is going to continue to be a space for conventional conferences in
Yes,
this I understand them.
yes,
But increasingly, that kind of the retreat format, I think, is a very natural and native fit for what folks are good at doing and are wanting to spend money and travel time to go do, I think.
yeah,
So if this might be the year where people got to figure out how to do both modes in a way, there's like the IRL live stream of a conference where we could kind of uh you know do the stage kind of thing together in the same building, which is really neat. But we'll also be able to just maybe informally without the cameras eat meals and live life together. I mean, it's going to happen at Midwestuary in both modes, I think. Uh,
yeah.
but yeah, it's going to be interesting. I know there's some people that are planning on merging, uh, coming up with some masks and not just with our real faces, the Midwestuary.
Yeah,
I think people are going to appreciate that now that we've learned more about what our real faces are and
yeah.
really appreciated where we're really coming from and understood that we're on the same page. I think there's going to be some people who are going to bring up stuff in the Q&A that are going to be a little prolific that I think is going to be going well. I don't want to
That's
say too much more.
that's part of the I mean, I love what Michael Sartori has been doing with his San Antonio
Yeah.
Sartori. And I think, you know, we need some of that and we have to play with these things. We have to. And yeah, so
To show
no.
how it can be done well, to
Yeah,
understand its place, what
yep,
play looks like, and where it fits into the cosmos, into that map. You
yep.
know,
No, I totally agree. Well, Matt, I've got some church work I need to do. But it was awfully good talking to you. We'll talk again because you
yeah,
you totally you
but
totally undermined the rando aspect of this. Totally, totally. I didn't get
deal with
anywhere. I didn't get anywhere near the dirt I was looking to get.
It'll all come out in all its dirty glory at Midwestuary. How about that over Chicago style pizza or something?
Sounds awesome. Sounds awesome. All right, Matt, you take care of yourself.
Yep. See ya.
Bye bye.